A year ago, none of this was here. None of these beds, none of the structures behind me, none of the plants. And now it's a growing garden. I have plants in the ground. I've already harvested. I have a lot more harvests to come. Hi, I'm GardenerScott, and I discuss everything gardening so that you can become a better gardener. Today, I'm going to show you my garden and what I've accomplished in 1 year to give you an idea of how to build a garden in 1 year. It was exactly 1 year ago that I stood on this spot with this same autism awareness t-shirt and showed you the space that I was beginning to work with in designing and building my garden. I had just moved into this new house. The very first thing I did was come into my backyard and try to envision a garden space. And so that video that was released exactly 1 year ago started the process. It began with garden design, observation, where I would come out, look at the sun, look at the animals, figure out how I could move about this space and design a garden. And also in that video, I discussed the concept of waiting 1 year to figure it all out and start putting the pieces together. Well, here it is, 1 year later, and I have a working garden. I spent a lot of time in those first few days just walking through the space and looking around, trying to see what I had growing and what the landscape was like. And I decided that the best approach would be to just start from scratch. So I brought in some heavy machinery and cleared everything, trying to take out as much of the grass and the weeds and the wild plants that were growing here and leveling it all in the process, because I was developing a grand vision for this entire space, what the whole garden would look like. And then it came time to start putting the pieces together, the individual beds and the areas that would 1 year later give me a garden that I could grow my first full season in. You don't have to do what I did and clear everything in a large space. You can just start with one bed at a time. It's very effective. The very first bed that I created was this Hugo culture mound. And of course I did a video to show exactly what that means. One of the reasons that I did this first is because there's a lot of buried branches underneath that take time to decompose. And it was just yesterday that I put the first seeds in this mound. Nothing else had existed when I did this, but I knew it would take at least a year for the soil to develop to the point that it was suitable for planting. You could start like this, just one mound using a Hugo culture method, wait a year, and then it'll be ready to plant. I also considered the future when I made this my next project. I built this bed and filled this bed, and I've showed videos on that process. I did that because I wanted garlic, and I was doing this whole thing last summer, so I really wasn't able to grow much. But I know that garlic takes about 9 months to grow. So I put this bed in, filled it, got the soil ready so that in September, about the time that I put garlic in my area, this bed was ready to go. And last year, this was pretty much it. Nothing else was growing in this space but the garlic in this one bed. I made this my next big project last year. I built these higher beds and put in this arched walkway. In the future, I'll have a lot of vining plants grow up. But I brought some plants with me from my last garden. I had some strawberries, I had some rhubarb, I had some comfrey, and I also had a couple of the currant plants that were in pots. So I needed a place for them. I put this up, put all those plants in the ground late summer last year so that they could start growing before winter set in. And it worked. All of the plants came back. They're all doing very well right now. And I've almost got fruit growing on these strawberries. So aside from the garlic, this was the extent of my garden. I wasn't expecting any production, but it was in place, ready to go. With all of this space built and ready to go last year, that meant it was ready for planting this year. So in this bed that just sat barren all winter long, I went ahead, filled it with good soil, and then early spring put in the asparagus plants, all of which are doing very well. And in the space behind me, close to those rhubarb plants, I put in some new honeyberries and also some butterfly weed to start attracting some of the beneficial wildlife that I so love to have in the garden. I did the same thing here. I got these livestock tanks last year and put them in place. But it wasn't until this year that I actually transplanted some horseradish, and just this last week transplanted some mints that I got from my brother and sister-in-law. And then about 3 weeks ago, I also added a currant bush right here. It's very small, but it's going to help fill in this space. 2 days ago, I added some salvia at each end, another great plant to attract pollinators. I was able to construct these 2 beds late in the year, and I did put a few plants in, including some spinach that overwintered pretty well, started growing in spring, and you may have seen in a couple recent videos, I actually got quite overgrown. It was just this year, in early spring, that I added these 2 beds in front of me. All of them have seeds or plants in them right now. Early this year, I ordered a whole bunch of bare root fruit trees. And in this space, I have about 12 different trees. While they were still dormant, I went ahead and cleared out this space for a little backyard orchard and then put the trees in. All of them are doing great. It's going to be 3 to 5 years before I get any fruit, but this was one of those projects that I wanted to try to get to as early as possible. Again, looking into the future. It really is no better time to plant a tree than today, because the longer you wait to put a tree in, the longer it's going to be before you get a harvest. This is another area that I began preparing last year. I'm standing underneath what one day will be a beautiful garden pergola, and it's going to be surrounded by fruit bushes. So I went ahead and brought in some wood chips and went ahead and outlined where the beds would be. And then this year, I got some fruit bushes. I've got aronia here, I've got some more currants, I've got gooseberries, I have some honeyberries, and I'll still be putting in some plants here that I haven't completely decided on yet. It's going to take a while to put the structure in place, but when it's in place, the plants will already be here. Again, because it takes time for them to develop and fruit. And I don't want to wait for the structure when I've already prepared the space for the plants. In the area that leads from the house to my garden, I put in an apple tree. This will be an espalier that will be formed in front of my garage. And then as I follow the path to the garden, I've anticipated this whole area that I want to be filled with flowers and more fruit. In fact, there's an apple tree right there, and there's another tree over there. In the space in the front, I recently put in this nice little solar-powered fountain. Now, the sun has gone behind the clouds, so it's not sending up much water right now. But this is where wildlife will get a drink. And I've added some petunias and some salvia, in addition to a nice little bench to enjoy the garden. And then this is a mirror image of that other bed that I had set up last year. I set most of this up this year with more asparagus on this side and more flowers and fruit bushes. I put in this concrete block bed about a month ago. And then about 2 weeks ago, I put up this trellis. And just this last week, I went ahead and put in these tomatoes. This was definitely a project for this year, but it fits within that same 12-month window. Also this year, I set up these straw bales for a little garden, and I've got these grow bags with plants inside. This is a very easy way to start gardening if you don't want to tackle some of these bigger projects. You can start small with straw bale gardening or container gardening. This is my latest bed. I just constructed this a couple days ago. I amended the soil underneath, brought in some good organic material like compost. I'm going to give it a little bit of time, but this is where I'll be putting plants and seeds very shortly. So this is my garden and what I've been able to accomplish in 12 months. It's by no means finished. I have a lot more that I want to do. And a year from now, I'll do another video to show you how much it's transformed. It's transformed immeasurably just in this last year. Don't think that you have to take on a big project like this. It does take a lot of work, but I broke it into individual pieces. There were a couple months that those were the only beds. And then I took a day to build these beds, and then another day to fill them with soil. And then that's what was in place before it went into winter. And then gradually I added a bed here and a bed there and kept expanding the garden. Now I was focused because I wanted all of this in place in about a year, and there were projects I just didn't get to. You can approach it from that perspective. Start small with just one bed. And then when you're ready, go ahead and add another bed, or add an arch, or add a trellis, but it doesn't have to happen overnight. You can take your time. Have some patience. Put in the ground what needs to go in the ground now, like trees and fruit bushes. And some of the rest will happen whenever you get around to it. I look forward to showing you the garden in months ahead, especially as things start growing. And years from now, when we can all look back and remember what it looked like in the very beginning and what it looked like 1 year later. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments below. I appreciate you watching the GardenerScott videos. If you haven't subscribed, I encourage you to do so now so that you can see new videos when they come out and become a better gardener. I'm GardenerScott. Enjoy gardening.